The plane was set for takeoff, and as passengers settled into their seats, tension simmered in first class. A flight attendant stood over a young boy, her tone icy and uncompromising. "You need to move. This seat isn't for you," she snapped. The boy, clutching his ticket with trembling hands, looked up with pure confusion. "But this is my seat," he whispered, his voice barely audible. With a curt shake of her head, she replied, "I don't think so." Around them, curious eyes darted. Some passengers whispered among themselves, while others pretended not to notice. No one dared to speak up. What the flight attendant didn't realize, however, was that the boy's father is the very owner of the airline. By the time the flight touches down, she will wish she could take back every word she uttered. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you're finding yourself drawn in by every twist and turn, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a single moment of this incredible journey. Stick with us as we unravel every detail. You won't want to miss what's coming next. He sat quietly in his first-class seat, his hands resting on the armrests as he gazed out the small oval window. Inside, the soothing hum of the engines blended with soft chatter as passengers settled in, wrapping him in a cocoon of anticipation. Every thump of his heart echoed his excitement. This was his inaugural solo flight, a well-deserved reward from his father for acing his exams. That ticket wasn't just a pass to luxury. It was a testament to his tireless dedication and the long nights of hard work. As he adjusted his seatbelt and absorbed the opulent surroundings, plush leather seats, gentle lighting, and the graceful efficiency of flight attendants gliding down the aisle, he felt a profound sense of belonging. But his bliss was abruptly shattered. A sharp, imperious voice cut through his daydreams. "Excuse me, young man." Standing before him, Amelia Winters exuded a chilling authority. Her crisp uniform and glinting name tag did little to mask the coldness in her eyes as she scrutinized his ticket. Confused yet respectful, he murmured a tentative yes, while her gaze slid over him and landed on the ticket in his hand. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" she demanded, her tone loud enough for every nearby passenger to hear. In that moment, whispers rippled through the cabin, and all eyes turned towards them. With a hurried nod, he fished out his ticket from his hoodie pocket, replying, "Yes, ma'am, seat 3B." Without much thought, she grabbed the ticket, gave it a cursory glance, and then shook her head firmly. "This is a first-class seat." Her question hung in the air as he sat up a little straighter, attempting to reclaim his dignity. When she coldly inquired about his parents, his stomach clenched further. "I'm traveling alone," he admitted softly. Without a trace of warmth, Amelia Winters adjusted her posture and responded, "I see," before handing back the ticket with finality. "Unfortunately, there must have been some mistake. This seat is reserved for first-class passengers only." His eyes widened and his grip on the ticket tightened as he insisted, "I am a first-class passenger." But her forced smile offered no comfort as she delivered her verdict. "I think there's been some confusion. You need to take your things and move to economy." A hush settled over the nearby rows. The businessman next to him shifted in his chair, feigning concentration on his newspaper, while a woman 2 seats ahead casually adjusted her sunglasses, stealing furtive glances without uttering a word. The entire cabin fell into a heavy silence. No one dared break it with a question or a protest. The boy's face flushed as heat crept up his neck. He stared at his ticket once more, as if rereading it might somehow validate his right to remain. "But this is my seat," he murmured, his voice barely audible against the weight of unspoken judgment. Amelia Winters exhaled slowly, her patience visibly thinning as she leaned in. "Sir, I'm asking you nicely." "You need to move," she said, her tone a blend of authority and reluctant disappointment. Every second stretched endlessly for him. He wasn't causing trouble. He wasn't even raising his voice. He simply wanted to sit in the seat he had rightfully earned. But as the stares of strangers bore into him, his ears burned with humiliation, and he felt the crushing weight of assumptions he never deserved. With a heavy heart, he slowly reached down to grab his backpack and stood up, his legs trembling as he stepped into the aisle. Without offering a word of support, the flight attendant merely turned and gestured curtly, "Right this way," ushering him toward the back of the plane. He passed by the luxurious first-class section, his gaze fixed firmly ahead, his chest tightening with each step to let them see how deeply this moment hurt. Once he reached the cramped economy section, he sank into an empty seat, its confines a stark contrast to the space he'd just lost. Desperation mingled with resignation as he fumbled for his phone and quickly typed, "They made me move to the back. I couldn't sit in first class. I had my ticket." Moments later, his phone buzzed with a terse reply. "What do you mean they made you move? Who made you move?" His father's message was sharp, measured, and unyielding. After a brief pause, he typed back, "The flight attendant," adding, "She said there was a mistake. She wouldn't listen this time." The conversation dragged on for a few agonizing seconds, 5 long seconds during which each blinking dot seemed to hammer home the reality of his predicament. Finally, another message appeared. "What's the flight number?" His fingers, trembling now, typed out the details. Almost instantly, his phone lit up again with the final, fateful reply. "Stay where you are, I'll handle it." He exhaled, closing his eyes for a moment. He didn't know exactly what his father meant, but something in those words told him this wasn't over. Not even close. He sat stiffly in his economy seat, his hands gripping the edges of his backpack. Just moments ago, exhilaration had pulsed through him like a heartbeat of victory. Now, it had been replaced by a crushing mix of humiliation, confusion, and raw frustration. The echoes of whispered comments from the first-class passengers reverberated in his mind, a constant reminder that no one had come to his defense. No one had challenged the flight attendant's callous decision. His phone vibrated again, jolting him from his thoughts. With trembling fingers, he read the curt message, "Do not move. Do not say anything else to her. Just sit tight." In that instant, he understood that his father's calm, measured response was already setting a series of events into motion behind the scenes, far beyond his immediate control. Meanwhile, at the front of the plane, Amelia Winters strode back to the galley with an air of smug satisfaction, as if she had effortlessly resolved another issue. She grabbed a stack of drink menus and began distributing them to first-class passengers as though nothing unusual had occurred. In stark contrast, Olivia Monroe, a younger attendant whose eyes had seen more than she let on, hesitated as she carefully placed a tray of glasses on the counter. She had witnessed everything. The sharpness in Amelia's tone, her failure to verify crucial details before condemning the boy to humiliation. Olivia longed to speak up, to challenge the flawed authority on display, but she held her tongue, knowing all too well that Amelia had ruled this cabin for over 15 years. "Was there a problem with his ticket?" Olivia finally whispered, her voice low and cautious. With a dismissive scoff, Amelia adjusted her uniform and retorted, "Please, you saw him. Do you really think he paid for first class?" The comment twisted Olivia's stomach into knots. She had seen passengers of all kinds in this luxurious section, and Amelia's tone reeked of unwarranted prejudice. "But you didn't even check the system," she murmured, more to herself than in protest. Amelia waved off the concern. "Trust me, I've been doing this a long time. I know when someone's in the wrong section. The sooner they learn, the better." Olivia bit her tongue, the words stinging with truth. Yet the risk of challenging a seasoned veteran kept her silent. Just then, the intercom crackled with an unexpected call. "Amelia Winters, please report to the cockpit immediately." Her hand froze mid-reach, and for a fleeting second, the confident mask slipped. As she glanced toward the front, her composure faltered, and a ripple of worry passed among the other flight attendants. It wasn't ordinary for a flight attendant to be summoned to the cockpit during service. Something was clearly amiss. With a final deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and began her hesitant journey forward. As she passed through first class, she noticed a few passengers looking up from their screens, sensing the shift in energy. The moment she stepped inside the cockpit, the atmosphere changed. Inside, the seasoned captain turned to face her, his graying hair and steady gaze conveying years of hard-won experience. On a small screen in the corner of the cockpit, a live video feed flickered to life, revealing a man seated in a high-rise office. His hands were neatly folded, his expression unreadable yet exuding a quiet menace that sent an icy chill down her spine. "Amelia Winters, do you know who I am?" he asked in a measured, piercing tone. With a shaky breath, she managed a timid, "No, sir." The captain's voice then resonated with unwavering authority. "This is Nathaniel Sterling, the owner of this airline." Her heart skipped a beat as his words sank in. "You removed his son from first class," he continued, his tone firm and unyielding, "without verifying his ticket, without checking the system, without reason." In that moment, her stomach dropped and the color drained from her face, the gravity of her mistake overwhelming her. Without a hint of raised anger, Nathaniel Sterling's next words struck like a hammer. "You are going to turn around, walk back to economy, and personally return my son to his seat. And when this flight lands, you will explain yourself to the executive board." The line went dead, leaving a void filled only by the oppressive weight of her actions. For the first time in her career, panic gripped her as she stood frozen, her breath coming in rapid, shallow gasps. The realization that the man who controlled her future had personally taken note of her error was almost too much to bear. The captain's eyes narrowed slightly as he added, "Well, you heard him." With a heavy heart and trembling legs, she turned and slowly made her way back toward the cabin, each step a reminder of her public undoing. The murmurs and sidelong glances from first class only deepened her sense of isolation and regret, as every passenger silently bore witness to the shift in her world. No one knew what was happening, but they knew something had changed. Amelia Winters reached the curtain separating first class from economy. Her fingers hovered over the fabric for just a second before she pulled it aside and stepped through. The moment she walked into the economy section, she spotted him, the boy. He sat by the window, his face calm but unreadable. His small backpack was tucked under the seat in front of him. His hands were resting in his lap. He wasn't crying, he wasn't making a scene, he was just sitting there. But something about his stillness made her stomach twist. Passengers in the surrounding rows glanced up, their curiosity piqued. They had seen what had happened earlier. Now, they were watching again, waiting to see what she would do. She cleared her throat, crouching slightly to be at eye level with him. "Sir," she said, her voice lower than before, "there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to escort you back to your original seat in first class." The boy blinked, tilting his head slightly. "A misunderstanding?" he asked. Amelia Winters nodded quickly. Yes, there was an error in seating. His eyes stayed on hers, sharp and steady, but he replied, "I had my ticket, you saw it, and you still told me to move." A few passengers exchanged glances. They had heard everything earlier, and they knew he was right. Amelia Winters swallowed hard. "I may have made a mistake in judgment," she said carefully, "but I'd like to correct it now. Please, come with me." The boy didn't move right away. He didn't argue, he didn't yell. He simply watched her, his silence stretching longer than she was comfortable with. Then he reached for his phone and typed a quick message. Seconds later, Amelia Winters' work tablet vibrated. She pulled it from her pocket, her fingers shaking slightly as she read the message that had been forwarded from the airline's executive office. Take your time. Make her understand what she did. Her heart pounded. The boy looked at her again, his voice calm. I'll go back, but I want to know why you thought I didn't belong here. A murmur spread through the nearby passengers. Some sat up straighter, others turned to whisper. Amelia Winters stiffened. I didn't think, the boy interrupted, his voice not angry, just firm. You didn't ask anyone else in first class for their ticket, just me. Why? A long silence followed. Amelia Winters' face burned. She wasn't used to being questioned. She wasn't used to explaining herself. For years she had controlled these situations, but now the control had been stripped from her hands, and she didn't know how to get it back. She took a shaky breath. I misjudged you. The boy didn't say anything. He let the words sit there, letting her feel their weight. Then, without another word, he picked up his backpack and walked past her. The walk back to first class wasn't a victory march. It wasn't smug or arrogant. It was quiet, dignified, and somehow that made it even more powerful. The first-class passengers turned as he entered, some looking surprised, others quickly looking away, embarrassed that they had witnessed the earlier humiliation and done nothing. Amelia Winters followed behind, feeling smaller with every step. The boy reached his seat, sat down, and calmly placed his bag beside him. She stood there awkwardly, uncertain what to say next. If there's anything you need, she mumbled, please let me know. The boy simply opened his book and flipped to the next page, his silence making it clear that this conversation was over. Amelia Winters turned stiffly, and she hurried back toward the galley, her face burning with humiliation. She had never felt so exposed before, so completely stripped of authority, and she had no idea what was coming next. Amelia Winters' steps felt heavier with each stride as she walked back to the galley. Her face burned, and her usually crisp uniform suddenly felt too tight, too suffocating. She had spent years enforcing the rules, making sure the cabin ran smoothly and handling passengers the way she saw fit. But this time, she had made a mistake. As she reached the galley, she exhaled sharply, gripping the counter. The other flight attendants avoided her gaze, but she could feel their judgment in the air. Olivia Monroe, the younger attendant, shifted uncomfortably before speaking. "You okay?" she asked, her voice cautious. Amelia Winters shot her a sharp look. "I don't need your sympathy." Olivia Monroe raised her hand slightly. "I wasn't offering sympathy, just wondering if you're ready for what's coming when we land." Amelia Winters stiffened. "Nothing is coming. It was a misunderstanding." Olivia Monroe let out a quiet scoff, crossing her arms. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated. "Because from where I was standing, it looked like you decided a first-class passenger didn't belong based on nothing but how he looked." Amelia Winters clenched her jaw. "I followed protocol." Olivia Monroe's eyebrows lifted. "Did you? Because I don't remember protocol saying to move a passenger without checking the manifest, or questioning a kid about where his parents are when his name is clearly on the reservation." Amelia Winters looked away, her fingers curling around the edge of the counter. She hated this, being questioned, being doubted. But what she hated more was the feeling creeping in her chest, the small, unwelcome voice in the back of her mind whispering that Olivia Monroe was right. She had looked at the boy and decided without evidence that he didn't belong. And now everyone knew it. Before she could respond, the in-flight phone rang, the sound sending a fresh wave of tension up her spine. Olivia Monroe gave her a pointed look. "I think that's for you." Amelia Winters swallowed hard before picking up the receiver. "This is Amelia Winters," she said, trying to steady her voice. A deep, calm voice spoke on the other end. This is Nathaniel Sterling. Amelia Winter's grip on the phone tightened. You will personally file a full incident report as soon as this flight lands, Nathaniel Sterling said, his voice as cold as steel. I expect a detailed explanation of why my son was removed from his seat despite having a valid ticket. Amelia Winters opened her mouth, but no words came out. You will also ensure that for the remainder of this flight, my son receives the same service as every other first-class passenger, Nathaniel Sterling continued. Nothing less. Yes, sir, she whispered. The call ended with a soft click. Amelia Winters placed the phone back on the hook and leaned against the counter, her hands clammy. She had made a serious mistake, one she couldn't take back. And now she wasn't just dealing with a passenger complaint. She was dealing with the man who owned the sky she was flying in. Amelia Winters stood frozen in the galley, the weight of the call pressing down on her like an anchor. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her uniform, forcing herself to keep her composure. But inside, she was unraveling. This wasn't a routine complaint. This wasn't a difficult passenger she could brush off. She had humiliated the son of the most powerful man in the airline business. And now she had to face the consequences. Olivia Monroe was still watching her, arms crossed, waiting for a reaction. Amelia Winters turned sharply. "Don't you have something to do?" she snapped. Olivia Monroe shrugged. "Already did, unlike some people. I follow protocol." Amelia Winters clenched her jaw and stepped out of the galley. She had never wanted a flight to end so badly. As she walked back into first class, she forced herself to straighten her posture. She had to act normal, as if she were still in control. But as she moved down the aisle, she could feel it. The shift. The air felt different. Passengers who once ignored her now glanced at her with curiosity, some with quiet amusement, others with thinly veiled disapproval. They had seen what happened. They had witnessed the moment she had escorted the boy out, and now they were watching her return, knowing she had been forced to fix her mistake at the front of first class. The boy sat comfortably in his seat, flipping through the in-flight magazine, his posture calm. He didn't even look up as she approached. For a moment, she hesitated. She had never been in this position before. Standing in front of a passenger she had tried to belittle, only to be the one left powerless. She cleared her throat. "Can I offer you something to drink?" she asked, forcing her voice to sound as smooth as usual. "Maybe a snack?" The boy didn't respond immediately. He turned a page in the magazine as if deciding whether to acknowledge her at all. Then, finally, he glanced up. "A drink?" he repeated, his voice evenly. "Yes," Amelia Winters said quickly. "Anything you'd like. We have fresh juice, sparkling water, tea." He tilted his head slightly. "You didn't ask me that before," he said. Amelia Winters blinked. "Excuse me?" "When I first sat down," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "You didn't offer me anything. You didn't even greet me like you did with the other first-class passengers." She felt her face grow hot. I didn't mean," he interrupted. "You just didn't expect to be questioned about it." Passengers nearby fell silent, their attention now fully on the conversation. Amelia Winters' breath came quicker. She had always been the one setting the rules, making sure things went the way she wanted, but now she was standing in front of a boy who wasn't afraid to hold her accountable. After a long pause, he gave a small shrug. "I'll have a sparkling water." Amelia Winters nodded quickly, grateful for the escape. She turned and hurried back to the galley, her hands gripping the tray a little too tightly. Olivia Monroe, still standing near the counter, smirked. "That didn't go well, did it?" "Mind your business," Amelia Winters muttered, reaching for a glass. Olivia Monroe raised an eyebrow. "I think it is my business. You embarrassed that kid in front of the whole plane, and now it turns out his dad owns the airline." I'd be sweating too if I were you." Amelia Winters didn't respond. She carefully poured the sparkling water, making sure the glass was perfect before walking back to the boy's seat. She placed it gently on his tray table, hoping that would be the end of it. But as she turned to leave, he spoke again. "By the way," he said, picking up his phone, "I just texted my dad about you." Amelia Winters' stomach twisted. She forced a tight smile. "I see." He took a slow sip of his drink, watching her. "Yeah," he said. He wasn't happy. Amelia Winters already knew that. She had heard it in his father's voice over the phone. But hearing the boy say it so casually, with quiet confidence, made her stomach churn even more. "I guess we'll see what happens when we land," he added, flipping another page in the magazine. Amelia Winters stiffened, nodding quickly before walking away. She had never wanted a flight to be over so badly in her entire career, but she had a sinking feeling that her problems were only just beginning. Amelia Winters moved swiftly back to the galley, but no matter how quickly she walked, she couldn't outrun the sinking feeling in her chest. She had lost control of the situation, and she knew it. The air inside the cabin felt heavier, the stares from passengers more pronounced. She could feel their curiosity, their silent judgment. She had always prided herself on her authority, on knowing how to handle difficult passengers, on making sure the rules were followed. But this wasn't about rules anymore. This wasn't about a ticket mix-up or an upgrade dispute. This was about her, the choices she had made. And now, for the first time in her career, she was the one being watched, the one under scrutiny. She reached the galley and gripped the counter, steadying herself. The other flight attendants continued their tasks, but they were avoiding eye contact with her. Even Olivia Monroe, who had been the most vocal, simply gave her a knowing look before focusing on organizing meal trays. Amelia Winters swallowed hard and exhaled slowly. She needed to pull herself together. She still had a job to do. But just as she thought she could regain some sense of normalcy, the in-flight phone buzzed again. The other attendants all paused, their eyes darting toward the phone. No one moved to answer it. Olivia Monroe smirked slightly. "I think that's for you." Amelia Winters shot her a sharp glare before reaching for the receiver. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted it to her ear. "This is Amelia Winters," she said, her voice not as steady as she had hoped. A deep, calm, yet unmistakably weighted voice filled her ear. "This is Captain Ethan Blackwell," the pilot said. "When we land, you'll be escorted directly to a meeting with airline executives. Nathaniel Sterling has requested a formal review of your conduct on this flight." Her stomach twisted violently. She felt lightheaded, as if the floor beneath her had disappeared. I understand," she managed to say, though her throat was dry. The pilot paused, then spoke again, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I strongly suggest you start thinking about what you're going to say when they ask why you removed a first-class passenger without checking his ticket." A cold sweat broke out at the back of her neck. "Yes, Captain," she whispered. The line clicked off. She lowered the receiver slowly, her fingers numb. She knew what this meant. A formal review, a meeting with the executives. She had seen it happen to others before. Attendants who had crossed a line, who had let their personal biases or poor judgment lead to customer complaints that couldn't be ignored. And now, she was one of them, for the first time. She considered what might come next: suspension, a mark on her record, or worse. The thought made her legs feel weak. She had spent years building her reputation, working longer hours than most, making sure she had control over every situation in the cabin. She had always prided herself on being strict, making sure passengers followed the rules. But now, she wasn't the one holding the power anymore. She was the one under scrutiny, and the people judging her weren't just passengers. They were executives with the authority to end her career with one decision. She took a shaky breath, trying to focus. She needed to keep working, act normal, finish the flight without making things worse. But as she turned, she caught sight of the boy in first class, sitting there, flipping through his magazine, sipping his drink as if nothing had happened. As if he already knew how this was going to end. And something about that made her chest tighten even more, because deep down, she realized he wasn't the one who should be nervous about what would happen when they landed. The plane cruised steadily through the sky, but for Amelia Winters, time felt like it had slowed to a crawl. She moved through her usual tasks, but her mind was elsewhere, tangled in a web of regret and anxiety. Every minute that passed brought her closer to the landing, closer to whatever awaited her on the ground. She had never feared stepping off a plane before, but today she dreaded it. Passengers were still whispering, stealing glances at her as she moved through the aisles. The energy in the cabin had shifted completely, and she knew why. She had made a mistake, and everyone on board could feel it. She had spent years handling flights with absolute authority, treating the cabin like her own domain where she made the rules. But now she felt like an intruder in her own workspace, powerless. As if the entire plane was waiting to see what would happen next. As she passed by first class, she saw him again. The boy sat with an air of quiet confidence, his fingers lazily flipping through the pages of the in-flight magazine. He looked so calm, so at ease, as if he had already won. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smiling triumphantly. He was just waiting. Amelia Winters felt an unfamiliar twist in her stomach. It wasn't just the weight of embarrassment, it was something else. It was guilt. For years, she had seen passengers move through first class, businessmen in sharp suits, women in elegant dresses, wealthy travelers who expected nothing but the best. And she had gotten used to who she thought belonged here. But today that belief had failed her. She had looked at a boy, a quiet, respectful child who had done nothing wrong, and she had decided, without a single piece of evidence, that he didn't belong. She hadn't checked the system, she hadn't verified the ticket, she had simply assumed. And now that one assumption had unraveled everything. She reached the galley again and grabbed a cup, filling it with water. Her hands were unsteady. Olivia Munro was still there, watching her with that unreadable expression. "You ever have a moment?" Olivia Munro said, slowly, where you realize you messed up so bad. There's no way to undo it. Amelia Winters didn't answer because she already knew the answer. Yes, this was that moment. Before she could say anything, the intercom crackled again, and the captain's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and ensure your tray tables are in the upright position. We will be landing soon." Amelia Winters closed her eyes briefly. This was it. 30 more minutes and the flight would be over. 30 more minutes before she stepped off this plane and faced whatever consequences were waiting for her. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wanted to believe that she could fix this, that if she explained herself properly, the airline would understand. But deep down, she knew the truth. Some mistakes couldn't be undone. Some mistakes followed you forever. She turned away from Olivia Munro, pretending to busy herself with the drink cart, but she could still feel the younger attendant's gaze on her. "You know, if you just treated him like every other first-class passenger, none of this would be happening right now," Olivia Munro said finally. Amelia Winters gritted her teeth. "I don't need a lecture," Olivia Munro shrugged. "I think you do, but I guess you'll get one soon enough." Amelia Winters didn't respond. She couldn't, because at this point she was starting to realize Olivia Munro wasn't wrong. Neither was the boy. Neither was his father. She had spent years believing she was always right, but today she had been so wrong. And in 30 minutes, she was going to have to face that head on. The cabin was quieter now. That usual hum of conversation had faded as passengers settled in for the descent. Some scrolled through their phones, others stared out the window, lost in thought. But beneath the surface, everyone knew that something was about to happen when they landed. Amelia Winters could feel it. It was in the way first-class passengers stole glances at the boy, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. It was in the way the other flight attendants whispered to each other, but stopped when she walked past. She had spent years controlling the cabin, dictating the tone of each flight, ensuring everything was done by her standards. But now, she felt like a passenger on her own plane, powerless to change the course of where this was going. She could still hear Olivia Munro's words ringing in her head. If you just treated him like every other first-class passenger, none of this would be happening. The worst part was, Olivia Munro was right. This wasn't about a simple mistake. This wasn't about a seating issue or an honest misunderstanding. This was about the way she had spoken to him, the way she had dismissed his valid ticket without checking, the way she had decided, without a second thought, that he didn't belong there. That was why she was about to face the most difficult conversation of her career. The seatbelt sign dinged on. She knew she should be focusing on securing the cabin, preparing for landing, doing her job. But instead, she found herself looking at the boy again. He sat calmly, his hands folded on his lap, his gaze fixed out the window. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't afraid. And that made it worse. Because he knew. He knew he wasn't the one in trouble. She was. She turned away, taking a deep breath and willing herself to push the feeling down. She had to pull herself together. But before she could take another step, her work tablet vibrated. She hesitated. Her hands felt clammy as she pulled it from her pocket. And she looked at the screen, a new message from the airline executive office. She swallowed hard and tapped it open. Upon landing, you are to remain on the aircraft. A formal review of your conduct will begin immediately. Do not exit the plane until further instructions are given. Her stomach twisted into knots. They weren't even going to let her leave. They were going to deal with her the moment they landed. Her throat went dry. She had seen this before. Flight attendants pulled into sudden reviews, some suspended on the spot, some walked out of the airport with security waiting for them at the gate. But those had always been other people, not her. Never her. She gripped the tablet tighter, willing her hands to stop shaking. But then another message popped up. This time it wasn't from the executive office. It was from Nathaniel Sterling. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the screen. A direct message from the owner of the airline. From the man who could decide whether or not she had a career after today. She forced herself to tap it open, her pulse thudding in her ears. What happens next will depend entirely on whether or not you take responsibility for your actions. A lump formed in her throat. He wasn't screaming at her. He wasn't threatening her. He wasn't even telling her what her punishment would be. He was simply giving her a choice. Take responsibility or lose everything. She stared at the message for a long moment, her breathing unsteady. She had spent her whole career believing that she was above mistakes, that she was always in control. But this time she had been wrong, and now the only thing that mattered was what she was going to do about it. The plane started its slow descent, the runway coming into view below. Amelia Winters tightened her grip on the tablet, her mind racing. She had spent years making snap judgments about passengers, but today she had learned what it felt like to be judged in return, and it was a feeling she would never forget. The plane descended smoothly, but inside the cabin, tension sat like heavy fog. The quiet rustle of seatbelts clicking, the occasional throat clearing, and the soft mechanical whir of the landing gear were the only sounds filling the space. Yet, beneath it all, an unspoken weight hung between the passengers, the crew, and especially Amelia Winters. She had read the message over and over. What happens next will depend entirely on whether or not you take responsibility for your actions. Nathaniel Sterling wasn't giving her an easy out. He wasn't threatening her outright, but the meaning was clear. If she wanted to salvage anything, her career, her reputation, her future, she had to own what she had done. The problem was, she had never had to before. For years, she had been the one in charge, the one making the rules, the one never questioned. But today she had been forced to face something she had never allowed herself to see. She had looked at that boy and, in an instant, decided he didn't belong. She hadn't checked the system. She hadn't verified the ticket. She had simply assumed, and now for the first time, she was seeing what that assumption had cost her. As the wheels touched down, the jolt sent a fresh wave of dread through her. This was it. No more time, no more hiding behind routine. The landing was smooth, but Amelia Winters barely registered it. She was too busy rehearsing what she would say. Maybe she could spin it as a misunderstanding. Maybe she could say she was just trying to be thorough. Maybe she could blame protocol or company policy. But the truth was, none of that would be enough. Because everyone on this flight knew what had really happened. And worse, so did she. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our destination. Please remain seated until the aircraft has reached the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off." A few passengers stretched, unbuckling their belts. Some picked up their phones, already texting or scrolling, but others, especially the ones who had seen what happened in first class, were still glancing at Amelia Winters, waiting, watching. The young boy in 3B was calm as always. He took a slow sip of his drink, then reached for his phone. A few taps, a message sent. And that was when the in-flight phone buzzed in the galley. Amelia Winters knew who it was before she even reached for it. Her hands were clammy as she lifted the receiver to her ear. "This is Amelia Winters," she said, forcing her voice to stay level. A familiar voice spoke, deep and composed. "This is Nathaniel Sterling." Her throat tightened. "You will exit this plane last," he said. His words slow and deliberate. "A security officer will be waiting for you at the jet bridge. You will not return to active duty until further notice." A full-body chill ran through her. "Mr. Sterling, this is not a discussion," he interrupted. "You made a decision on this flight. Now you live with it." The line went dead. Amelia Winters' grip on the receiver tightened before she slowly placed it back on the hook. The other flight attendants stood nearby, their faces unreadable. Even Olivia Monroe, usually quick with a smirk or a comment, said nothing. Because they all knew this wasn't just a complaint anymore. This was career-ending. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers rose from their seats, stretching, gathering their belongings, and chatting about their layovers and final destinations. But Amelia Winters couldn't move. She stood frozen, trapped in the reality of what was about to happen. One by one, passengers started filing out. The first-class section emptied. The businessman who had glanced at the boy in 3B with mild curiosity walked out, pulling his carry-on behind him. The woman with sunglasses, who had silently witnessed everything, left without a word. And then finally the boy stood. He adjusted his backpack, buttoned his hoodie, and stepped into the aisle for the first time. He looked directly at Amelia Winters. He didn't smirk, he didn't gloat, he simply studied her. And that was worse. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to say something, anything. But no words came because, for the first time in her career, she realized it didn't matter what she said. The damage had been done. He gave her one last look, then turned and walked off the plane. A moment later, the doors opened fully, and the flow of passengers continued. Amelia Winters didn't move. She couldn't. Not until the last person had left. Not until the doors closed behind them, and not until the security officer standing just beyond the jet bridge took a slow step forward and said, "Come with me." Amelia Winters swallowed hard as she stepped off the plane, her legs suddenly feeling like they weighed 100 pounds each. The bright overhead lights of the jet bridge felt exposing, like a spotlight had been placed directly over her. She had walked through countless airports, always with a sense of authority, her head held high. She was used to being in control, the one giving orders, the one making sure things ran smoothly. But today she wasn't the one in charge. A uniformed security officer stood just outside the jet bridge, his stance rigid, his hands folded in front of him. He wasn't aggressive, wasn't hostile. He didn't need to be, because Amelia Winters already knew what this meant. She had seen it happen before. An attendant caught mistreating a passenger, a staff member failing to follow protocol. A violation big enough that corporate didn't wait for an internal report. They acted immediately. This wasn't just a warning, this was a reckoning. The officer gave her a brief, unreadable look, then gestured down the terminal. "This way, ma'am." Her pulse hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to walk forward. She could feel eyes on her, other crew members, airport staff, passengers, lingering near the gate. They knew, some might not have known the full story, but they recognized the signs. A flight attendant being escorted away immediately after landing. That wasn't normal. That wasn't a routine debriefing. That was trouble. The officer led her down a quieter hallway, away from the usual rush of arriving travelers. A door with a security keypad beeped as he swiped his badge. And then they stepped into a private corridor, one she had never walked through before. And that's when she saw them. 3 airline executives sat inside a small conference room, waiting. One of them was Richard Bennett, the senior operations manager, a man who never got involved in minor employee infractions. If he was here, it meant this was big. Sitting at the far end of the table, a tablet propped in front of him displayed Nathaniel Sterling himself. He wasn't in the room physically, but his presence was more powerful than anyone else's. His sharp eyes flicked up at her through the screen, his fingers interlocked in front of him, his posture calm. Amelia Winters felt her breath go shallow. A chair scraped against the floor as one of the executives motioned for her to sit. "Amelia Winters, please have a seat." Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to lower into the chair. Hands folded in her lap, her uniform suddenly feeling suffocatingly tight. Richard Bennett cleared his throat and leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the table. "You know why you're here?" She hesitated. I believe so, sir." "You believe so?" Richard Bennett raised an eyebrow. "Because we have a detailed report that says you removed a paying first-class passenger from his seat without verifying his ticket." Amelia Winters wanted to explain, she wanted to defend herself, but she already knew anything she said would only make it worse, so she said nothing. Richard Bennett continued, his voice even but firm. "We have flight records, passenger statements, crew observations, and most importantly, the personal complaint from Mr. Sterling himself." Her stomach dropped. "The question is, Amelia Winters," Richard Bennett said, leaning back in his chair. "How do you explain it?" The room fell into thick silence. Amelia Winters' heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. This was the moment she could try to justify it. Say she had been following standard procedure. Say she had been cautious about ticket fraud. Say she had just made an honest mistake. But she knew none of those excuses would hold up, because the truth was simple. She had seen the boy, she had assumed, and she had acted without checking because she had believed without thinking that he didn't belong. And now she was paying the price. Her fingers curled into her lap, her throat was dry, but she forced herself to speak. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice quieter than she expected. "I should have checked the system. I should have verified the ticket. I didn't, and I was wrong." Another long silence followed. Nathaniel Sterling studied her through the screen, his expression unreadable. "You didn't just make a mistake," he finally said, his voice cold. "You made a decision. You looked at my son, and you decided without proof that he didn't belong. Amelia Winters felt her chest tighten. That's not just bad service, Nathaniel Sterling continued. That's bias, and that's something I will not tolerate in my airline. Her pulse roared in her ears. She had known this would be bad, but hearing it spelled out like that, felt like a blade cutting straight through her. Richard Bennett adjusted his glasses. Amelia Winters, effective immediately, you are suspended without pay pending a full investigation. Her breath hitched. The word suspended rang in her head like an alarm. This will go before the Executive Review Board in the next 72 hours. Richard Bennett continued. Until then, you are not to report for duty, you are not to access company systems, and you are not to contact any crew members regarding this matter. She wanted to argue, she wanted to fight, but what could she say? Nothing? Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a failure on her part. Nathaniel Sterling leaned forward slightly on the screen, his gaze sharp. What happens next depends on you, Amelia Winters. You took something from my son today, his dignity, his moment, his rightful seat. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Amelia Winters' breath was shaky as she realized what he was saying. He wasn't just talking about punishment. He was giving her one last chance, not to save her job, not to keep her position, but to own what she had done. The weight of that reality settled over her, and for the first time in years, she felt small. The meeting is over. Security will escort you out, Richard Bennett said. A guard stepped forward, waiting. Amelia Winters stood slowly, her hands trembling. She had stepped onto that flight as the most experienced crew member on board. She was stepping off it as someone who might never fly again. And this time, she had no one to blame but herself. Amelia Winters walked out of the conference room with stiff legs, her entire body feeling disconnected from reality. The security officer stayed a step behind her, not rushing her but making it clear she wasn't free to move on her own terms anymore. The hallway was cold and sterile, with bright overhead lights that made everything feel too sharp, too real. Every step she took echoed in the emptiness, but inside her head, everything was loud. Thoughts crashing into each other, trying to grasp onto some kind of solution, some way to fix this, but there wasn't one. She had spent years working for this airline, enforcing the rules, keeping order. She had memorized the protocols like the back of her hand, had trained younger attendants on how to handle difficult passengers, had taken pride in keeping things under control. Yet in one moment, a single snap decision, she had lost all of it. And why? Because she had looked at that boy and decided, without evidence, that he didn't belong. Not because of his behavior, not because of some technical issue with his ticket, but because of an assumption. The truth sat heavy in her stomach as she stepped into the employee corridor leading toward the airline's administrative offices. The walk wasn't long, but it felt endless. She had seen other crew members go through this process before. The forced walk after a serious complaint. The quiet exit through a door meant for employees no longer welcome on the flight roster. But she had never imagined it would happen to her. She had been too sure of herself, too certain that she was always right. The moment she stepped through the last set of glass doors, the energy changed. She was no longer just walking through airport hallways. She was walking through judgment. Other employees, gate agents, flight attendants from other crews, supervisors, paused what they were doing, their eyes flicking toward her as she passed. Some whispered. Others didn't bother hiding their looks of curiosity or quiet disapproval. Word had already spread. That was the thing about an incident this big. It didn't stay quiet. By now, everyone knew she had been pulled from the flight. Everyone knew whose son she had removed. And everyone knew that whatever happened next would define her future. Her throat was tight as she forced herself to keep her posture straight, even though her entire body felt like it was collapsing inward at the exit. A younger flight attendant, one she barely knew, stood near the crew lounge, her arms folded across her chest. She didn't say anything as Amelia Winters passed, but there was something in her expression that made the shame hit even harder. It wasn't anger. It wasn't smug satisfaction. It was disappointment. And somehow that was worse. She finally reached the last door, the one that led to the outside employee lot. She had walked through this exit 1,000 times before. But never like this. Never with the knowledge that she might not be allowed back in. She hesitated for just a second, gripping the strap of her bag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She could just leave. She could quit before they fired her. She could send an email full of excuses, file an appeal, blame the situation on a miscommunication, claim she had been just doing her job. But none of that would change what happened, and none of that would erase the truth. She had made a choice, a bad one, and no matter how much she wanted to take it back, she couldn't. With a deep breath, she stepped through the door outside. The air was cool and crisp against her face. It should have felt refreshing, but instead it only made her more aware of the weight pressing down on her chest. She didn't know what came next, but one thing was certain: this wasn't over. Not yet. The cold air outside hit Amelia Winter's skin, sending a sharp chill down her spine. The airport terminal loomed behind her, a place she had spent years walking in and out of without a second thought. But this time the air smelled different, and the ground beneath her feet felt unsteady. For the first time, she wasn't leaving work at the end of a shift. She was walking away from a career she wasn't sure she would have tomorrow. Her steps slowed as she neared the employee parking lot. A few other crew members passed by, some talking among themselves, others moving quickly to their cars. She could feel the weight of their glances. Not all of them looked at her. But she knew they were aware. Word traveled fast in the airline industry, especially when it involved something this big. She fumbled for her keys with numb fingers, unlocking her car and sinking into the driver's seat. The moment she shut the door, a heavy silence surrounded her. No hum of the aircraft, no overhead announcements, no passengers asking for assistance. Just quiet, for the first time since she had stepped onto that plane earlier that day. She was completely alone with her thoughts, and the thoughts weren't kind. Her hands hovered over the steering wheel, gripping it tightly as the realization settled in fully. This was real. She wasn't just being sent home for the day. She wasn't being written up for a minor infraction. She had been suspended without pay for something she could not argue her way out of. And what made it worse, she deserved it. Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat, the screen lighting up with a notification. At first, she didn't move. She had spent the last few hours dreading every message, every call, afraid it would be yet another step toward the inevitable. But when she glanced down, her chest tightened. An email from Nathaniel Sterling. She hesitated before reaching for it, her thumb hovering over the screen. She swallowed hard and tapped it open. Subject: accountability. Amelia Winters. I'm sure by now you understand the severity of what happened on Flight 297. I won't waste time repeating what's already been made clear by the board. However, I believe in people taking responsibility for their actions, and that includes giving them a chance to acknowledge their mistakes. I am giving you that chance now. If you wish to formally apologize to my son, I will make sure he receives your message. However, I want to be clear. This apology isn't for me, it isn't for the airline, it isn't for your career, it's for the person you wronged. If you can't bring yourself to do that, then I see no reason for this conversation to continue. I'll wait for your response. Amelia Winters' breath hitched. She stared at the words, reading them again. A chance. He was giving her a chance, not to save her job, not to change what happened, but to own up to it. Her fingers trembled as she placed the phone back on the passenger seat. She had never been in this position before. She had been with the airline for years, had dealt with hundreds of passengers, had enforced the rules countless times, but she had never been on the other side of accountability. She had spent years believing she was the one in control. Now, she had none. She knew what she should do. She should type a response, own it, apologize. But she hesitated, because deep down she knew this wasn't just about an apology. This was about who she was. If she admitted it now, if she really let herself say it out loud, she couldn't take it back. She had judged that boy unfairly. She had let her assumptions decide her actions. And now, for the first time, she had to face that truth. Not as a flight attendant, not as a professional, but as a person. Her chest felt tight as she picked up her phone again, her heart hammering as she tapped on reply. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was it. She could choose denial, choose to frame it as a misunderstanding, choose to blame the system, the pressures of her job, the expectations of her position. Or she could tell the truth. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and started typing. Subject: accountability. Mr. Sterling, I don't expect forgiveness, and I won't make excuses. I made a terrible mistake. I didn't just misjudge your son, I disrespected him. And, well, I didn't realize it until it was too late. I have spent the last 10 years enforcing rules, thinking I was doing my job the right way. But now I understand that I let my personal bias influence my actions, whether I intended it or not. That is something I will have to live with. I would like the opportunity to apologize to him directly, but I understand that is entirely his choice. If he doesn't want to hear from me, I accept that. No matter what happens next, I will take full responsibility for my action. I am sorry. Amelia Winters stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, without allowing herself to second-guess it, she hit send. The moment the email disappeared from her inbox, she set her phone down and exhaled shakily. It wasn't enough to undo what had happened. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but, for the first time that day, it felt like a step toward something real. She leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes. Whatever happened next, she had no control over, but this she had owned. Amelia Winters sat in her car, staring at the ceiling, her pulse still uneven from hitting send. The email had left her hands, and with it, so had any illusion of control she once had. She had spent years thinking she knew everything about handling people. She knew how to calm an anxious flyer, how to de-escalate a disagreement between passengers, how to maintain order when things got tense. But today she had learned something new, how it felt to be on the other side of judgment. Her fingers tapped against the steering wheel, waiting, as if expecting an immediate response. But nothing came. Of course not. She let out a slow breath, pressing her forehead against the cool leather of the wheel. She was exhausted. The weight of what had happened today wasn't just sitting on her shoulders, it was sinking into her bones. What happens next depends entirely on whether or not you take responsibility for your actions. That was what Mr. Sterling had said, and for the first time in her life, she had. But responsibility didn't guarantee forgiveness. The sound of a soft vibration made her flinch. Her phone screen lit up, and her heart jumped as she saw the name at the top of her inbox, Mr. Sterling. She swallowed hard, pressing her lips together before clicking the message open. Subject: accountability. Amelia Winters, I appreciate your response. My son will decide whether or not he wants to hear from you directly. That is his choice. Regardless, I wanted you to understand that today was not just about a mistake. It was about how much assumptions cost people. You assumed my son didn't belong. You assumed his presence in first class was an error, and because of that you humiliated him in front of an entire cabin of passengers who said nothing. You are not the first person to do this to someone, and unless you learn from this, you won't be the last. This isn't just about your career. This is about the kind of person you are when no one is watching. I don't know what the board will decide in your case. That's up to them, but I do know this. If you truly mean what you said in your apology, then you won't just change because you got caught. You'll change because you understand why it matters. I hope, for your sake, that you do. Amelia Winters read the email once, then twice. Her throat tightened. You'll change because you understand why it matters. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but there was nothing left to say. She had always thought that losing her job would be the worst thing that could ever happen, but this was worse, because now she had to live with the reality of what she had done. Her career was no longer her biggest concern, her conscience was. She set the phone down, her hand shaking for the first time in a long time. She wasn't thinking about her title. She wasn't thinking about her reputation. She was thinking about the people she had overlooked, the people who had probably gone through the same thing before, but never had the power to fight back, the people she had dismissed. She leaned back, staring at the roof of her car. For the first time, she had to ask herself a question she had never considered before. Who was she really? And more importantly, was she willing to change? Outside the car, life at the airport moved on. Planes took off, passengers rushed to their gates, and crews prepped for their next flights. The world kept turning, But for Amelia Winters, everything had stopped. Because today she had been forced to face a truth she had spent her whole career ignoring, and there was no going back. She took a deep breath, then turned the key in the ignition. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she understood that her choices, her assumptions, had consequences. And now she had to figure out what kind of person she was going to be when no one was watching. Amelia Winters' story teaches a profound lesson about the importance of honesty and taking responsibility for one's actions. In life and at work, anyone can fall into the trap of making snap judgments and letting biases cloud their judgment without fully checking the facts. Wrong decisions, like the one Amelia made by removing a passenger based on unverified assumptions, not only hurt others, but also damage one's credibility, trust, and even career. This reminds us that instead of making excuses for our actions, we need the courage to own our mistakes and learn from them. Being accountable and facing the consequences of our decisions is essential for personal growth, for becoming a better person, and for building genuine relationships with those around us. When we remain humble and listen to criticism, we pave the way for progress and avoid repeating the same painful errors in the future. Ultimately, this story shows that self-improvement starts with acknowledging our faults, accepting responsibility, and committing to change. It reminds us that every mistake is a chance to grow, learn, and become truly better. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more captivating and unforgettable stories. Stay tuned for more exciting content coming your way. See you in the next one.